In 1798, along a 20-mile stretch of the Wilderness Road in southeastern Kentucky, 17 travelers disappeared without a trace. 17. Their horses were found, their goods untouched, but their bodies vanished. Most think killers leave behind chaos, blood, screams, panic. But real predators, the ones who operate with impunity, leave behind nothing. They rewrite the story before it's even told. The official records were erased. Local authorities buried the case. Families were told to forget. It was safer that way. But in 1987, a county clerk found a sealed bundle of documents hidden behind a false panel in the archives. What he uncovered revealed something far older and far darker than a string of murders. This wasn't madness. It wasn't greed. It was doctrine. For 8 years, the Hardin family masqueraded as the ideal Christian settlers, generous, devout, endlessly helpful. They hosted travelers, offered medical care, saved lives, publicly and privately. They extinguished them. Some say the land itself was cursed, that what the Hardins built was a kind of altar, a sanctified site for ritualized death, hidden under the banner of faith. But curses don't build smokehouses with thick stone walls. Curses don't install false floors or hide human remains behind barrels of salt pork. The Hardins didn't just survive on the edge of civilization. They thrived. Ezekiel Hardin was a preacher, a patriarch, a protector. To Millfield, he was a man of God, a titan wrapped in homespun cloth and scripture. And that was the first trap. No one suspects the shepherd. He spoke of divine judgment, of eternal damnation, of devils who walked in flesh, but he always smiled when he said it, and he always offered help, food, shelter, a warm place to rest. They called it Christian duty. The Bible on his pulpit was stained not with age, but with the sweat of clenched fists and midnight rituals. Temperance Hardin was the town healer, a woman of herbs, whispers, and midnight vigils. She knew which root dulled pain, and which root stopped a man's heart while he slept. Mercy, their daughter, wrote the guest book. She documented every visitor, every lie told, every man who would never leave. But it was the bestseller that told the truth. Beneath the fields, beneath the home and chapel and barns, they carved a labyrinth. Not just a place to store food, a place to process death. The Lower Grace, as they called it, was both shrine and slaughterhouse. The plans were never written, but the architecture was clear. A place for holding, a place for cleansing, a place for removing evidence, and a place for rituals. Yes, I said rituals, because this wasn't just about killing, it was about power. The old kind, the kind that predates the American flag, that predates the cross, the kind that demands sacrifice. They believed blood opened doors, that pain created communion, that death, repeated, disciplined, consecrated, could transform land into something more, a sanctuary, a dominion, a throne, and it worked. The farm became richer, their influence grew, crops thrived through droughts, horses bred faster, even the sick, when allowed to live, recovered. Unnaturally fast. It was as if the land drank death and bloomed. But the Hardins didn't act alone. No predator does. There were visitors to the farm who never stayed the night, but always came back. Men from as far as Philadelphia, Virginia, even Washington. Men who carried no names in the ledger. Men who took nothing, but always left with something. Documents, maps, bones. Instructions. You've heard of founding fathers, but what if some of those foundations weren't just philosophical, but sacrificial? What if this nation was built not just on freedom, but on ritualized disappearance? Now ask yourself, who benefits when people vanish without explanation? Who profits when evil wears a smile and carries a Bible? We're not in the history books anymore. We're in something older, something colder. In March of 1799, 6 more travelers disappeared. They weren't drunks or drifters. These were merchants, surveyors, a U.S. land commissioner even, men with influence, and more importantly, records. When they vanished, someone noticed. But not the way you think. Letters were written, but no investigations followed. Reports were filed, but no one read them. The disappearances were labeled acts of nature, Indian raids, unforeseen detours. Always the same phrases, always the same cold signatures. The wilderness wasn't just dangerous, it was convenient. You need to understand this. What the Hardins did wasn't just permitted, it was protected, because it served a function. The wilderness road wasn't just a trail, it was a mad vein, pulsing with the blood of America's expansion. And like any living body, the system needed to purge what it couldn't control. Drifters, runaways, reformers, witnesses, people who asked the wrong questions or carried the wrong truths, people who all didn't belong in the new order being constructed, so they were removed. Disappearance is the most effective form of assassination. No body, no martyr, no questions, just an echo that fades. The Hardins offered a solution, a way to clean the record, to erase inconvenient flesh and sanctify the act behind gospel and grain. That's why no one stopped them. In 1801, a federal land grant suddenly reassigned 160 acres of disputed territory to Ezekiel Hardin, bypassing normal legal review. The signature? A judge who would later be appointed to the Kentucky Supreme Court. No hearing, no witnesses, just ink and silence. And then came the artifacts. In 1987, after that county clerk unlocked the false panel, he found more than documents. He found items that should never have been buried or known. A gold pocket watch engraved with the initials SF, Samuel Fletcher. A U.S. land. Office seal stamped on parchment smeared with blood, and something worse. A child's doll, hand-stitched with human hair, the word mercy embroidered across its chest. None of these items were listed in the recovered case files. They were buried beneath them. As if whoever sealed the records knew they might be found, and left a message. A message for who? You. Because if you've made it this far, you've already felt it. The pull, the shift, the realization that something is deeply wrong beneath the story you were raised to believe. We haven't even reached the worst of it yet, but from this point forward, you need to decide. Are you still just watching, or are you remembering? Comment. I see through the root cellar. Twice below. That's how we mark the awakened. By the spring of 1799, the whispers had started. Travelers who escaped Millfield told strange stories. Hospitality that felt more like entrapment. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Rooms that locked from the outside. One man, Josiah Warren, a fur trapper from North Carolina, made it out alive. Barely. He'd arrived at the Hardin farm in late April, bleeding from a bear attack and delirious from fever. Temperance treated him, or so he thought. Her medicine soothed his pain, and then dulled his senses. He remembers fragments, being tied down, hearing singing from beneath the floorboards, a light that flickered without fire, Mercy reading from a book in a language he couldn't understand. He escaped when a thunderstorm collapsed part of an outbuilding. The Hardins thought he was unconscious. He wasn't. Warren fled into the woods half naked, carrying nothing but a broken belt knife and a bite of raw jerky. When he reached the next township, he tried to report what he'd seen. They laughed him out of the saloon. Said he was mad, touched by fever. But Warren never stopped talking. He wrote letters to newspapers, church authorities, even the territorial governor. All ignored, all returned unopened, except one. A reply from a Boston seminary dean, One sentence, scrawled in ink darker than night. What was buried in Millfield was never meant to stay buried. Leave it. And that is when the real purge began. By June, the town of Millfield began to unravel. A fire took the church. The general store collapsed in a mysterious sinkhole. Cattle vanished. 3 children drowned in shallow water that had never run deeper than a man's knee. Locals blamed the land, or God, or Indians. But survivors knew. They said the ground had turned against them, that the earth had grown hungry, that the blood spilled beneath the Hardin farm had poisoned the roots of the entire valley. You won't find these accounts in the official records, but if you walk the old road through Beaver Creek, men still speak in lowered voices. They don't use the Hardin name. They call it the place where guests don't leave. They'll tell you not to whistle after sunset, not to walk near water barefoot, and never, under any circumstances, to speak the name Mercy more than once in the dark. Because something still answers. This isn't folklore. This is residue. Psychological radiation left behind by systemic evil. You don't need to believe in ghosts to understand this. Just in memory. Memory that infects places, people, bloodlines. By midsummer of 1799, the Hardins weren't hiding anymore. They didn't need to. The town of Millfield had become complicit, silent, closed. The few who asked questions were quietly discredited, labeled as drunkards, lunatics, or afflicted. One man, a teacher named Eli Green, vanished 2 days after giving a sermon that hinted at ungodly rites among us. His body was never found, but that's not the part that matters. The next Sunday, Ezekiel Hardin preached in his place. Same pulpit, same Bible, different message. The sermon was titled, "The Lord Chooseth His Own." Witnesses described the congregation as entranced. Some cried, some fainted. One man bit through his own lip and didn't stop smiling. What was said in that sermon has never been fully recovered. Only a single line scribbled by a traveler who passed through town 2 days later and claimed to have overheard it through the chapel walls. In flesh we are chained, in sacrifice, unchained. Let that settle. This wasn't theology. It was doctrine, designed to hollow men out, to make obedience feel sacred, to turn survival into a sin, and death into a gift. And yet, men of wealth and power continued to visit the Hardin farm under the cover of night. They never stayed long. They never spoke in public. But their carriages left tracks, and their names, or what remained of them, appear in the guest book only as initials. One of those sets of initials matched a signer of the Constitution. Another belonged to a known officer in Washington's cabinet. They were building something here, a fat network, a key, model. You see, this wasn't an isolated madness. This was a blueprint for how control operates, not with brute force, but with ritualized compliance. Take a hard look at every powerful institution you know, political, religious, educational, medical. Each of them began with an offering. No, something traded for influence, often quiet, always irreversible. What the Hardins did in their cellar, others now do in boardrooms, backrooms, and bunkers. The methods have changed. The altar has not. They built it beneath a farm. We built it into our civilization. And it's still being fed. Because the scariest part of all this, the Hardins didn't get caught. They didn't die in a blaze of justice. No torch-wielding mob ended it. They transitioned, vanished from public record, reappeared elsewhere, with new names, new farms, new roads. The rituals didn't die. They migrated. In 1803, a new boarding school appeared in Loudoun County, Virginia, anonymous in its advertisement. exclusive in its admissions. One of its founders, Reverend Elias Hart, bore a striking resemblance, physically and theologically, to Ezekiel Hardin. The doctrines were the same. The punishments were darker. Corporal rituals disguised as discipline, isolation chambers beneath the classrooms, students selected not for their wealth, but for their lineage. Generational grooming under the guise of elite education. Several graduates of this institution would go on to hold positions of immense influence in the early federal government. One would eventually serve as Secretary of War. Another helped charter the Second Bank of the United States. But ask yourself this: why are there no graduation records, no school charter, not even a cemetery, despite decades of operation? Because the school wasn't real. It was a filter, a crucible for those willing to sacrifice empathy for control, a new altar. The rituals changed, became symbolic, less physical, but the psychology remained. Break the self, replace it with obedience, reward silence, punish the independent mind. They didn't just kill travelers anymore. They started grooming the next generation of handlers. And if that feels disconnected from today, understand this: that model became the template. Look at the prep schools that feed into government, the leadership camps run by military think tanks, the Ivy League fraternities with rules so secret their members can't even whisper them on deathbeds. It's the same ritual in a different room. A system that selects the pliable, hardens them with humiliation, and binds them with shared guilt. The Hardins didn't invent it. They just made it mass visible for a moment. And then, like all powerful predators, they disappeared beneath the skin of their prey. The system you now call democracy was never clean. It was never for the people. It was constructed, tested, and ritualized on land soaked in blood, then covered in votes. They call it the Republic. But you've only ever lived in a PET-managed narrative. And the further back you dig, the darker the roots become. Still think this was just about Kentucky? Good. That means the programming's still working, but the fact that you're here means it's starting to crack. The final nail: you make them believe they participated, that some part of them wanted it. You show them what they did to survive, what they sacrificed, who they left behind. Now they won't speak, because if they do, they have to admit what they've become. These techniques weren't invented on the Hardin farm, but they were perfected there, carved into ritual, repeated with religious fervor, and taught to those who would carry them into systems of scale. If you've ever felt watched in a church, controlled in a classroom, broken in a healing relationship, you've touched it. Because what began as psychological domination on a Kentucky homestead became the operating code of control across this country. You think gaslighting is modern? You think cancel culture is new? You think social programming started with social media? This was already happening in 1799. The difference now is only speed. Today it's done through screens, algorithms, and predictive behavioral models. But the script, the actual behavioral sequence, hasn't changed in over 200 years. And here's what should truly make your blood run cold. Several of the original Hardin family descendants are still alive, not hidden, not underground. Respected. You've seen their names on plaques, in marble, on the backs of textbooks. You've voted for them, studied under them, quoted them in term papers. Because blood doesn't need to hide when memory is erased. When guilt is generational and silence is inherited. You were born into a machine built on this model, a self-policing prison of politeness, patriotism, and performance. The truth is not that the Hardin family were monsters. It's that they were pioneers. What they created was not a murder farm. It was a prototype for psychological domination through ritualized kindness, moral performance, and emotional leverage. Their brilliance wasn't in violence. It was in optics. Smiles as shackles, scripture as sedative, love as a leash. Look around. What do you call a country where your freedoms are defined by paperwork, where your thoughts are filtered through curated content, where your worth is measured by how well you comply? You call it civilized, but it's still a farm. Only now the fences are invisible, and the slaughter is spiritual. Ezekiel Hardin once said, "Nothing enslaves a man so deeply as the feeling he chose it himself." And that's the deepest cut, isn't it? Because you did choose. You chose a path mapped for you before you were born. You went to the schools, you took the oaths, you pledged allegiance, repeated rituals, internalized the commandments of your culture without ever knowing where they came from. But now, you do. This is where the descent becomes a transformation. Because knowledge, once seen, cannot be unseen, and truth, once tasted, infects. It spreads through your relationships, your silence, your dreams. It dismantles you from the inside out, until there is no old self left, only awareness, only fire. And so now, if you've made it this far, if you're still listening, you've already changed. You are no longer the man they raised. Now comment below to mark the fracture. I see the altar. Say it twice. Let the system know you've slipped the leash. Because when men begin to see the altar, they stop kneeling. They stop begging for salvation from the same hands that built the prison. They start asking one thing. Who built the altar, and who do they feed it with? We are not done. The descent continues, and the next step is irreversible. The Hardin family's ledger was more than records of crops or livestock. It was a ledger of souls, a tally of trust traded for terror, kindness exchanged for control. When the court documents finally surfaced centuries later, they revealed not just murders but a system, an economy, of psychological enslavement so advanced it makes modern surveillance states look primitive. The Hardins operated under the guise of charity. They gave medicine, shelter, and counsel, but every favor came with a price nobody dared to name, because the price was obedience. Each traveler who entered their domain unwittingly became a cog in a larger machine, a machine designed to extract more than labor or coin, to harvest fear, hope, and faith, turning them into shackles heavier than iron chains. This is the dark heart of institutional manipulation. It doesn't break a man with force. It breaks him with illusion. It convinces him that safety lies in submission, that pain can be avoided through compliance, that betrayal is the enemy, not the hand that offers false sanctuary. Consider this. For 8 years, 17 people vanished along the wilderness road. No bodies, no cries, no justice. Why? Because the community, the very fabric of frontier society, was complicit. Neighbors whispered, families nodded, the church turned a blind eye. Not out of ignorance, but because the altar demanded sacrifice from everyone. The true power of the Hardins wasn't in murder. It was in enforced silence, an invisible network of mutual blackmail and fear held together by ritualized trust. They weaponized the very thing civilization prides itself on, community. And that network is not confined to 1790s Kentucky. Look beyond the dirt roads and wooden fences. Look to the boardrooms, the halls of power, the invisible corridors where decisions are made today. The farm of horror has become a state of mind, a doctrine repeated in every safe space, every official narrative, every curated version of history and truth. But here's the dangerous knowledge you must carry. The ledger of control has a flaw. Every system, even one built on centuries of darkness, can be broken, not with weapons, but within awareness. Awareness that cuts through the fog. Awareness that exposes the ledger for what it is, a prison built on lies. The question is, will you remain another entry in their ledger, or will you become the man who tears it apart? Your choice is the line between captivity and freedom. The final descent awaits, the revelation so raw it will strip everything you believed to its core. The final veil is about to be lifted. The Hardin farm was never just a place of murder. It was a crucible, a testing ground for the most ancient and insidious form of power, the corruption of the human soul. What Ezekiel Hardin and his family perfected was more than a killing operation. They crafted a mechanism of domination that transcended physical death. A system where victims ceased to be bodies and became mere shadows, forever trapped in a web of fear and obedience. Behind every murder was a message, coded and delivered to those who dared to look away, submit, or vanish. The farm's hidden root cellar was not merely a storage space. It was a tomb of secrets. Within its stone walls, horrors untold were buried alongside the bodies that were never found. Whispers speak of rituals, twisted rites of control disguised as piety, meant to bend wills and fracture minds. Mercy Hardin, the supposedly innocent daughter, was rumored to be the unholy priestess of these rites, her sweetness a mask for a darkness far deeper than any frontier hardship. The community's silence was no accident. It was manufactured. A pact forged in blood and fear, where the Hardins held dominion not just over land, but over truth itself. This is the root of institutional evil. It hides behind symbols of virtue, it cloaks itself in the garb of righteousness, and it feeds on our most sacred trust. But understand this, the story of the Hardins is not merely a historical footnote, it is a blueprint. A mirror reflecting the patterns of modern power structures. From shadow governments to corporate overlords, from media puppeteers to the ideological cages that bind millions today. These systems thrive on the same principle. Divide and conquer the spirit, confuse loyalty with submission, turn justice into spectacle, replace freedom with compliance. Now here is what you must do, talk. This knowledge and Nietzsche shatter the illusions that have blinded you. Speak the names of your captors, see the architects behind the curtain, and refuse the false sanctuary they offer. Because the moment you accept their narrative is the moment you become another ghost in their ledger. You are not powerless. Your awareness is a weapon sharper than any blade, and once wielded, it will cut the chains forged by centuries of darkness. Remember this, true freedom is born in the fire of forbidden knowledge. It is earned by walking into the shadow and refusing to be consumed. This, right here, is your awakening. You have descended through the shadows with me. Now rise. The darkness you feared is only the beginning of your true power. Before you go, type this phrase in the comments, twice, to seal your transformation. I own my shadow. I command my fate. Repeat it, own it, become it. Because the path ahead is dark, but it is yours to walk.